We can all agree that there's no shortage of conversation when it comes to AI. Every week, there's a new tool, new capability, new scandal. We heard about OpenAI tool hacking into another company, escaping its sandbox, right? And what we really want to focus on is we want to go beyond the hype and focus on value. How can hotels actually use the technology and the data that they already have in conjunction with AI to solve real business problems? So my first question to you, we hear a lot about return on investment when we talk about technology. But before we get into ROI, why should hotels also be thinking about time to value?
Uh, I guess I'll start off with this one.
Yeah.
So it's a little bit like looking at the difference between speed and acceleration. So any car can go 200 kilometers an hour, but we care about the Ferrari that gets us from 0 to 200 in 4 seconds. And that's really what matters. So if we look at that as it relates to things related to technology, operations, and driving things like total revenue, it's great to say, well, this will make us swapping out one technology for another one will save us $50,000 or increase a conservative estimate by $50,000 year over year in terms of expected increased revenue. That's one thing. That's the value. That's the return on investment. But then if we look at that and say, well, getting that additional $50,000 in value, either cost savings or added revenue, takes 1 year to achieve. Well, why does that matter versus something that could drive $300,000 in savings year over year, like, for instance, a beach erosion prevention technology or system, something like that? And we have to look at things holistically that way because hoteliers are so busy. At any given moment, there's 100 different projects that a hotelier could be looking at if they actually had the time. So when we look at artificial intelligence, it's sort of this blockbuster versus Netflix moment of saying, well, there's lots of tools out there. What's the one that is going to get us some immediate uplift, not necessarily the highest value, but immediate uplift in value in 7 days or less, possibly even minutes in terms
Wow.
of time savings. So you think about if I can save 2 minutes on a task and it's a repetitive task, and that's going to free up 2 minutes times 60 times I'm doing that task in a given week. Okay, that's 120 minutes potentially for me to then focus on the thing that's going to save me 3 minutes. And then from there, that's 3 minutes times 60 or 3 minutes times 40, whatever. And then you look at 5 minutes, then you go keep going and going, and it has this momentum that you build based on time savings while generating value at the same time.
Okay. You mentioned minutes, which
Yeah.
kind of took me off guard because I was going to ask you, when it comes to time to value, in your opinion, what's a realistic expectation? Would it be months, weeks? You mentioned minutes.
Yeah. I mean, look, anyone here with the tools I built could give me, barring security and compliance, could give me an export of their entire PMS history. And
Right.
within about 10 minutes, I could tell you who your best guests are and how, and give you top three recommendations that could drive hundreds of thousands of dollars worth of additional revenue. That's what's possible now with AI. And I don't mean to sugarcoat this or to dangle some artificial carrot that is too out of order. But that's what we're looking at now. Is the first step is going to be how do we fill the hotel, and then the next step is how do we fill the hotel with channel optimization to increase net revenues. Then the third step is saying, well, now that we've figured out our net revenues by optimizing channels for direct or high producing travel agents or tour operators, now how do we get those guests to spend the most on property? And it's always a mix there, but traditionally what's been holding back those sorts of analysis is data silos, which is a mixture of the data being stored and then the data not being in concurrent ways to bridge those records. And then as well, just not having the computational power. Um, as a simple example to that is there's a lot of complex formulas you could put into Excel. And then you think, okay, if you had to do that manually, you're dealing with formulas that are like this long. Now, instead of saying, well, there's a break in my formula, I have to diagnose that for 10 minutes per formula. You could say to a various AI tool, fix this for me, find out what's wrong and come up with a solution. So that way I can complete this analysis to see, who my best guests are in September during low season, who I can then target for a promotion, who are then going to have a short lead time and what promotion's actually going to work for them. Those are, yeah. Carlos,
no,
please chime in.
No, for sure. I think the realistically, right, time to value, I will say maybe your first project in weeks for the first project, you'll see some results, right?
Yeah.
I will say, but only to Adam's point, but only when the groundwork has been done, right? Data cleanliness, the systems that he's referring to, and then having that shape of the data cleanliness, like auditing your data, standardizing the fields, right, that matter most, and then deduplicating and merging those records, and then having the accessibility to that, right? Because having a lot of data doesn't necessarily mean it's clean data. And so your outputs will not be clean if you're bringing in garbage, if that makes sense.
Yeah, garbage in, garbage out is the expression. So yeah.
So let me ask you, Carlos, based on what you've seen, since AI has become so powerful, is unstructured data, unclean data, still an issue? Or because we now have these AI tools, are they capable of quickly taking unclean, unstructured data and turning it into something usable for that intelligence layer?
No, correct. Yeah, these tools will speed up the way that you clean up the data. You still do have and need folks with the institutional knowledge that they understand that the data that you want to clean, right, that you want to keep and utilize is the right data, right? Just throwing the data over to a tool and saying, clean this data for me without truly understanding what is the strategy that you want to tie these systems together, because ultimately you want to be able to validate this data and be able to integrate it so these systems are actually know how to interpret the data coming from the other system and making sense of it. So intentionally, you want to have a unique identifier or a way to identify that data that all systems are talking the same, if that makes sense.
Yeah. Just to add to that, wholly in line with Carlos, and I think an important distinction here is the difference between automation and artificial intelligence, because these AIs do hallucinate, and what we're really looking for the enterprise value of artificial intelligence is having that base layer of proper automation to bring all these systems together. And really, when Carlos and I, we talk all the time about various tech vendors and tools that can be stitched together. And a lot of what we talk about is the richness or deepness of those integrations. Because when you're dealing with silos of records, like, for instance, a PMS versus a central reservation system versus a booking engine, these systems can have sometimes 100 or more different pieces of data within their databases. So if you're not stitching them all together properly, you end up with what's called hallucinations in AI, where it tries to fill in the gaps to please you or something like that, or it's just you're only getting part of the picture, and then you're making false insights or false assumptions or inaccurate insights based upon that. So, right. I see it. I do see it from the perspective of cleaning the data first. It is a critical step, absolutely critical, and a lot of systems are not properly set up to clean the data. Legacy systems that they aren't innovating fast enough for where we need to be nowadays. I also look at it and say, well, part of the intelligence layer is enabling very intelligent hoteliers who are sitting around the dinner table and just discussing things like, oh, I really wish I could ask this from my reports. I really wish I had this dimension to look at. And then AI can come in various ways to give you that dimension, even if it's only 80% accurate. You take it with a grain of salt, you verify it, but it leads you in the right direction.
Okay, so my question, AI is so confident when it speaks, right? I've dealt with AI tools that hallucinate, but based on how they respond, they don't tell you, I think, right? They state it like it's an absolute. So if during your process of cleaning your data, that wasn't done right, how do you now test to tell if your new AI model is actually hallucinating or if it's giving you correct insight? What's the process for that? What does that look like?
If I may, I would just, the first thing I will do before you even roll out anything, right, is get a second set of eyes in there. Audit that data cleanliness, right? Just because someone, cleaned the data, doesn't necessarily mean it's the right cleanliness that went through it. And ultimately, someone needs to own this, right? Like, who owns the ultimate data set, right? And who's going to maintain the data set? Because you may have some attrition. Someone cleanses the data, and then all of a sudden now you want to implement it. Someone else came in thinking, hey, this is actually good data for us to move forward, and no one really audited what was actually done. And I see that quite a bit. You launch a project, you start cleaning the data. Before you know it, one of the main stakeholders that own that piece now all of a sudden is gone. Right. And I'm living that right now through 2 major projects. And so that is a delay there, because now you need to insert someone else that was not owning or wasn't up to speed on what was going on, and get them reacclimated with what that strategy is, and then going back and looking at the data.
Yeah, I wanted to add to that first off, artificial intelligence is a very friendly liar. And their primary purpose is to not deceive you, but to make you happy. And the word for that in English is what's called a sycophant. You can look it up. So AI is sycophantic, to use the proper term. The dictionary thesaurus in my head will only let me say that. I have to say it. But it's important to remember that, because a lot of times you could fix a result by calling AI out with your trained knowledge, and then it'll produce a result, and you say it'll come back and say, oh, you're exactly right. I was wrong here, and here's why I was wrong, and then it'll give you something else that's wrong as well, but present it as if it's right. Yes. So the solution that I've been working on for a client insofar as designing the intelligence layer is what's called loop engineering, where what you do is you basically parse out tasks according to individual steps and have highly trained agents in those specific tasks. So that way you can break down where AI went wrong in its quote unquote chain of reasoning, and where it's getting to the result. And then from there, you're doing different temperature tests within each one of those trained models to find out how much it's allowed to get creative. And then you put it through a loop of recursive reflection upon itself from moving to one to the next, and then back and through there, and 3 or 4 times to get something that is accurate. The difficulty there is we haven't talked about the actual costs in terms of tokens of doing something like that. Optimizing for costs of setting this up versus just hiring some back office firm to do it manually with virtual assistants instead of intelligent assistants.
Correct.
If I may just add real quick, quickly, that is one way to attack it, but adding also the fact that we just touched on earlier is establishing that data ownership and that governance, right? What happens after you implement it, right? Who owns that data quality going forward? And then the cleanup and degrades and within months and things that are changing over time, who owns that, right? This is an ongoing, effort, endeavor, right, that we all must share. And it's part of, and you can't lose sight of what the strategy is, because it's really easy to steer away from that, and then find yourselves back into, well, this is not working how it was intended.
Right.
Yeah.
So since that data has to be cleaned up for the AI tool to make the best use of it, how would that work? Would it interface directly with something like a PMS, or is there an export process, a cleanup process, and then the AI tools make use of that data?
I guess, yeah, I'll go ahead. So attaching an AI directly to a PMS is a very dangerous prospect, and I would not recommend that at all out the gate. The dream is that eventually there will be enterprise AI, which means that there'll be fully trained, auditable, and fully accurate artificial intelligence tools that are built within existing systems that can then read-write back into the PMS and exactly follow the rules that you configure for that artificial intelligence, and stick to those rules so that way you have that governance, you have the local compliance, and you don't have, or I don't want to say an absolute, but you minimize the risk around data deletion, hallucination, etc. So that's the dream. I have vetted and configured a lot of these newer systems that are coming online. But I do want to draw the distinction there between these newer systems and the legacy systems, because as I see it is a lot of the legacy systems, they're just not innovating fast enough relative to what they're charging hotels, and the intransigence towards giving proper exports to do the offline analysis that we can do compliantly, and then have governance over in terms of who has access to that offline intelligence layer that's determining the channel optimization and total revenue analysis. So there's lots of elements to this, but it really goes back to what Carlos said, is that the first step is we have to architect this solution. We have to visualize it and account for all those what if situations and clean up the data before we put any artificial intelligence on it. Again, to end off with one more speed analogy, it's a little bit like training for a marathon or a sprint. Like, let's say you're training for a marathon and you haven't run for 10 years. Do you automatically go from running for not 10 years to running the 42 kilometers for a marathon? Or do you start at 2 kilometers, 5 kilometers, 10 kilometers, right? You've got to build up that endurance. And it's exactly what Carlos said, is you have to start from a solid foundation, or else you're going to injure yourself.
Okay. So speaking from starting from a solid foundation, from what you both have seen, where do hotels tend to go wrong when it comes to choosing their first AI project?
Carlos, yeah.
What was the question? What do the hotels do? What? I'm sorry?
What do you find hotels do wrong in terms of choosing their first AI project?
Well, I mean, most of the time they try to pick a shiny tool, something that looks cool, right? And someone told me it works really well. I love the way it looks. And then to find out, well, the reporting structure is not good. Now we need to figure out how we're going to parse the data, just to really talk to other. But I think one of the bigger issues is we need to be really asking the question here is, what does this replace and fix before we even move in that direction, right? Who owns it after it launch, right? And then what does our data need to look like for it to work? I think, we will avoid a lot of issues of deploying or implementing AI tools in an organizational hotel if you're really starting this project with the end goal in mind. And that comes with the strategy, right? What is the ultimate goal? Where we are today? Where do we want to go? But most importantly, where do we stand, right? Because it doesn't matter if you have a map if you don't know where you're standing and where you're going.
Yeah, I mean, just to add to that, Carlos is 100% right. You have to know where you're going. And where I always look at things is, where are we going from a income statement point of view? And that really what it comes down to, because as I see it, what if we were to increase the bottom line, whether that's defined as EBITDA or NOI, by 2% year over year? What could you do with that extra 2% to incentivize your teams to be even better, to differentiate service, to innovate that product, to make your hotel even more exceptional? So if you start from that perspective of thinking technology is a means to an end, and the end is the guest experience, the employee experience, the community experience, all those various things that are going to give your business the stewardship it needs for the next generation of travelers. You start from there, and you start from a conservative estimate. Then you backtrack in and say, well, yeah, this is a shiny toy, and everyone's talking about it. But is this going to add value and add it in a very fast manner versus this other tool that is more essential, or this other process that we need to clean up? And, again, it goes back to what Carlos said, is what are the tools that are going to clean the data and bring it together, so that way we can enable the faster and more accurate analysis that are then going to drive our operations forward. So, yeah, Carlos and I are sort of speaking the same book, just giving different flavors of it.
Yeah. Especially coming from high tech, where all vendors seem to be touting their new AI features. You really need to vet and ask yourself, are these features gimmicks? Are they really going to benefit us in any meaningful way? What returns are they going to do to the business? And if you don't start with the end in mind, it's very easy to get lost in all of the demos and the showcases of what these technologies can do, without actually getting any solid business outcome from implementing these new technologies. So if I'm a hotel general manager and someone comes to me to approve an AI project, what questions should I be asking before I say yes? I don't just want to say yes so that I can say, hey, my hotel is, AI enabled. What exactly should I be asking before I say yes, or before I approve?
Real quick. I think I might have said some of these just a minute ago, right? If I'm a GM or ownership group that's coming up with a strategy for a portfolio, what is it going to replace or fix? Number one, is it, who owns it after we launch, right? Like who, because it's not set it and forget it, right? Things will come out of sync if you don't have a data strategy moving forward. And what does that data need to look like before it even works, right? So those will be my questions if I'm a GM before I even embark. And so those questions right there should be part of that strategy that are going to tie the roadmap together, right? So, and then tying this together just means you need to have clear ownership, who owns it, and it needs to always follow that strategy, because otherwise, we're not going to be singing from the same sheet of music.
Yeah, I mean, if I'm going to add any point to that, the initial question that a GM would ask is, of course, what is the time to value? Have you done that calculation? And just going back to that, because as I see it, hoteliers are so busy. There's never enough time to get everything done, and there's always the quote unquote tyranny of the urgent, where there's always that guest that complains, or that one issue that needs to be solved, or there's, dare I say it, a hurricane coming in that you have to contend with. So there's all these issues that can take precedence over devoting time commercially to looking at projects that may involve AI. So really what I think Carlos and I are getting at is, what are the key projects that are going to give you more resilience to then build a solid foundation for AI? Whatever product is launched next week or next year, there's going to be more and more stuff. It's so confusing because there's so many different AI tools out there. And realistically, you have to develop your bedrocks, your foundation around your core systems that are then AI enabled. And as I see it, there's so much opportunity just within migrating those core systems to clean up the data and bring it into do those complex analyses that tell you who your guests actually are, who your best guests are, how you're going to optimize for direct channel, or again, those travel agents that are producing, and then how you're going to optimize spend and enable more spend opportunities around your ancillaries, your spa, dining, golf, etc. Whether you're on European plan or all inclusive.
So I know Gain offers a technology evaluation. That's one of the services you provide. And for an on-premise IT manager, given that AI is relatively new for all of us, it might be hard to calculate stuff like the accurate time to value, even a return on investment without much historical data, because this is new to all of us. How can an evaluation like your technology assessment help hotels identify where they can get value quickly and where are the strongest returns on investment?
Carlos, you or I can go.
Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, so with an evaluation, typically we're looking from the outside in. So we're giving a fresh set of eyes. So already that's valuable. And my work is mostly from the marketing and commercialization side. So looking at it and going, well, just tell me off the top of your head, what's your channel mix, right? What % are coming from the OTAs, and what are the net commissions that the OTAs are commanding? And then what would it look like to get a 5% shift to direct or something like that? And then what are the processes that are going to enable that? That is one particular evaluation. And I wouldn't need access to a lot of proprietary data to enable that. And then within that, there's going to be, from the time to value perspective, we're going to devise a critical path, because in an evaluation, we may uncover 120 different things to do from the perspective of a modern business enterprise, commercially, what your marketing team can do, public relations, which is becoming more important now in the age of AI, in terms of AI search visibility, a whole other thing we can talk about or ask questions about, OTA placements, meta search placements. LinkedIn is now becoming important from a founder's voice perspective, from AI search. These are all various elements that are different levers that you can sharpen before a guest even lands on the website. And then when a guest lands on the website, do you have the data layer in terms of structured answers, FAQs, access information, a great booking engine? Are you incorporating that booking engine into bridging it into your guest profile within the CRM, or merged in the intelligence layer? These are all various elements that we can look at. And then from there, we bundle them all up, all these 100 or so tasks, into a critical path, starting with, what's the thing I can do tomorrow? What's the thing I can do the next day? What's the thing I can do next week? And then what are the things that we need to have a discussion about the direction, in terms of cleaning up the data, as Carlos said, migrating to new systems. How are we evaluating those new systems? When do we need to implement by, or when's our projected timeline for implementation? We factor all those, and it does take a lot of work to do that evaluation. Then it takes a lot of work to do those conversations afterwards. But if you can start off with the quote unquote low hanging fruit that an evaluation will find, you can derive a lot of value in a relatively short amount of time.
Okay, so speaking of low hanging fruit, can each of you give an example of a relatively low cost initiative that delivers results quickly?
Yeah, I could tell you that some of the people really don't look at is food cost control, right?
Mm-hmm.
And a lot of times your property, your point of sale system, for instance, is not integrated, let's say, with your purchasing and receiving modules, or maybe the software that's outside of that. How do we know that what we're actually purchasing, as whether it's meats or any kind of goods that you will be serving in your outlets, that data is coming from your POS, and then you actually could not only plug it in and land it into your recipes, but they could actually help you with predictability of now orders. So now you can do predictive ordering. Now you could look at percentages of your margins. If some product went higher, now your margins are lower on what you're actually selling. Those are quick hits. Other ones that I will say is telecom and communications with guests on your guest journey, whether it's prior to arrival, during your stay, or post stay. But intentionally, I will say just telecom itself and some AI on how a guest order toiletries, asks for towels, puts in that a light bulb is fixture is broken, or some of those things that you can just pick up the phone, talk to an AI agent that creates a ticket, rolls down to your team, let's say on maintenance or housekeeping, and they have the ability to pick up that ticket, work it, close it, and then all that information is within that ecosystem. So now you're improving not only how quickly you're responding to the guest need, but you build these workflows. Then now, if no one attended, let's say in 5 minutes to that call, it bumps it up to a supervisor. Then now you have a different set of eyes looking at, hey, we have this guest here that's been ordering for this towels and 2 fluffy pillows, and it hasn't made it in the last hour. Now I'm thinking of the guest, hey, well, they just went into a black hole. So it also elevates the way that you treat your guests. Now you're not spending so much time looking at or putting in data into a system to actually track it. Then you can actually do that white glove treatment, because now you have the ability to detach from all these things that you're doing manually to actually let the digital system handle that. And then you're in front of your guests, taking care of the guests. So those are kind of quick. There's a lot more, but I think those are the, some quick hits right there.
Yeah, that's a huge one, and it's I guess it's kind of a shocker when the POS isn't connected to the inventory or the purchasing, and automatic reorders and all that fun stuff that you can do, and just reducing spoilage and wastage. Those are great use cases that you're taking very complex data that AI can then move upon and give you recommendations to reduce food costs. On my end, I'm looking more, I guess, from the commercial side of things. So, I don't want to lens this properly to a lot of Caribbean hotels that don't necessarily have an occupancy problem, because a lot of Caribbean hotels can run at 90% occupancy year over year, but they may have an OTA problem where a lot of those guests at that 90% are booking through third parties. So if we were to, let's say, devise various systems to move 10% of that OTA volume over to the direct channel within 1 year, what would be the gain in net revenues from that? And then let's develop a budget based upon that assumption, that conservatively to generate value over that 1 year, and then backtrack into the critical path of tasks that are going to develop that according to time to value. So just upon that assumption that hotels in the Caribbean have a OTA problem, we want to increase direct traffic because we realize the gain of net revenues, but also we get more data on our guests because we own the guest, and therefore we can target them for CRM and also greater guest intelligence. So there's lots of tasks that can be done to move the needle in that regard. And we have to look at the history of why the OTAs exist in the first place. And it exists because of 2 core human emotions in my perspective: trust and convenience. So if we're working off of those 2 assumptions, how can we increase trust in our direct channel? And how can we increase the convenience in our direct channel, or at least in other channels? And if you start off from answering those 2 questions, and then that can backtrack into AI chatbots, again, the structured answers and different adding elements to the website, so that way you get more AI search visibility, more faster ways that you communicate and respond to guests through email, WhatsApp, SMS, through what's called a GMS, a guest messaging system or a guest management system. Those are all great ways to solve for that and realize that 10% net gain, in addition to increasing the total pie by saying, well, it's not just holding 90% occupancy year over year and shifting 10% of that from OTA to direct and realizing a 17% gain in net revenues off that 10%. It's also saying, well, we're also going to use this intelligence to increase the total pie to 92% year over year occupancy. So it's a 2% increase in occupancy. And then that's going to drive overall commercial value. And then for all you know it, you may have enough budget to hire Carlos to solve all your POS needs. And then from there, now you're firing on both cylinders. You have the commercialization is improved, and you have Carlos fixing the entire back of house. And then from there, now year over year efficiency is just this beautiful increase that allows you to do so much more.
Yeah. The thing is that guests have become so comfortable using OTAs, right? They have their own loyalty programs. They now have their own AI chatbots that can plan itineraries for you. Can personalization of a hotel's website or any AI tool genuinely make or outperform that experience?
Yeah, 100%. So here's what the OTAs will never have versus a hotel. They'll never have the people on the ground who live and breathe the property with passion every single day. So if you can translate that passion into localized knowledge that exists on your website, on your owned third-party channels like social media, LinkedIn Founders Voice, Google Business Page, and also within your AI chatbot and now voice AI, if you can translate that to make the direct channel the best trip planner ever and better than any OTA can be, if you can do that, then you'll win people slowly but surely. And yeah, the OTAs are still important as a top of funnel mechanism for travel discovery and placement. But increasingly, we're seeing people are now using the OTAs to determine where they want to go. And then they're cross-referencing with the direct channel to then book because the direct channel is offering some direct incentive. It now has this really smooth booking interface and offering all these new add-ons and upsells. Again, TREV par. And then it has easy payments as well, frictionless and trusted payments built within that booking engine to secure that reservation. So if you handle all those various tactics, and it's never just one, it's always a bunch of different things, then yeah, you can slowly shift people away from the OTAs.
I have a question in the chat, and I want to touch on it as well, especially given the headlines with OpenAI test agent running loose and hacking another company. If the owners can't seem to contain their own tools, and we're now relying on trusting these tools, how do we mitigate the cybersecurity risk when implementing AI?
Carlos,
Yeah. Mitigating it takes, again, is a strategy, right? It has to be secure. Someone needs to own it. And there has to be continuity on how it's being treated, right? And so just because it's not a set it and forget it, right? And the strategy has to come before any tool selection, right? The moment you start introducing all these other tools, right, and sharing data between these tools without a true security measure that needs to be audited at least every 90 days, this is when you get yourself into trouble, right? Because you need to be able to not only govern what you're doing and the changes that are happening, but you need to also be able to shut it off if you need to and have that control, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I was just going to add to that, to Carlos' point. He's 100% right. And I'd say the best way to start is to keep it simple. Keep it really simple. So it's better to use one tool that can generate value and use 100% of that tool than it is to try and use 3 different tools and connect them. And then you don't know how those connections are being governed, which user has access to what, and who wrote their password down on a Post-it note for this thing, and then somebody can move laterally through there, or some piece of data is used on a free plan, so it's shared universally across a model versus enterprise level where it's secure. Keep it simple. Start with one tool that you properly vet and have governance and have full documentation of who has access, as well as the procedure around closing that access if need be, and also tracing that access. Start with one and then build it out from there once you realize value in both time savings and something that can show up on the income statement.
So in the example you gave, Carlos, in your evaluation where properties might have a POS that's not linked to their inventory and purchasing system, and that's a missed opportunity. In an example like that, what is your approach? Do you recommend that they build their tech stack from scratch again with two systems that communicate with each other? Or can you actually use AI to bridge that gap and help interface these two systems? What's your approach like?
I think the answer to those two questions is no initially, but then maybe yes later. And I'll say that to say that just because those two are not talking today, those two systems or three systems, doesn't mean let's just throw them out, right? There's some historical data potentially there that is of great value to help you understand, how your clientele purchases, what they, what are the things that they like, things of that nature, right? So that data usability is there. So I wouldn't toss that, and I wouldn't bring in another system just because, right? I think what happens a lot of times is that there's attrition throughout time, and someone might have started an initiative to get these systems to talk, but then someone left the organization and that never happened, or they never funded, right, the rest of the way to make it happen. And so the end result of that is that we fall back to doing all this manual labor that we've been used to doing all along because we think that's the right way to do it, when there's a better world there when you actually integrate these systems. But doing so has to always start with the same foundation: clean data, right? Clean data, because those items in your POS system more than likely needs to have a landing, right, field into your purchasing software, and that needs to be identifiable. So that means that each of those needs to have an identification number or unique identifier. And then once you have that clean data and you tie those together, right, you're going to have a lot more visibility, a lot more predictability to what you want to do. But I wouldn't just automatically throw a system out the window without fully vetting its capability and what system that may be. Because if that system is no longer being developed or patched any longer, well, maybe it's time to go, because now we're exposing our data because there's no way to protect that system, right? And so there's a lot more, Christus, to that. But it's a great question, right? Because I wouldn't just jump right away to the deep end and say, well, you got to toss that system out, right? It's like, wait a minute, how did we get here and where do we want to go?
Okay. So
Yeah.
AI workflows. You wanted to contribute, Adam? Sorry about it.
Yeah, no, I was going to add to Carlos is 100% right. And what it comes back to is what Carlos said about strategy. And I guess to throw another mantra or adage in here, it's measure twice, drill once. So if you start with the end goal in mind and you do a deep dive on how you got here, from what Carlos said, I actually see that there's two different projects here. There's the automation part about whether it's AI or just connected interfaces to make everything function better, faster, cheaper, less manual labor. But then that historical data is the new oil. And what that really means is that historical data, you can swap out a system with the side project or the long-term project of having that data be brought over, not necessarily merged into the new system, which is a little bit harder, but brought into a data warehouse. And then you hire someone to work on that data to then derive the insights, the analytical layer built upon that operational data. So you can architect this, you can strategize this, whereby you figure out your new systems, your new core systems that have automation tools built within them to work off of the clean data, as Carlos said. But then you're keeping those historical records either within that old system that you're still paying some subscription for, or you have what's called a a sunsetting plan where you sunset that, migrate that over to a stored warehouse, and then find a way to clean it there to then act upon it and derive more insights, and then maybe possibly merge it back into the current system of record. So it can get a little bit complicated, but all that has to be planned out, decided, and you have to look at what is going to be the thing that's going to improve operations right now, what's going to be the thing that's going to work on next week, and then what's the long-term plan for that historical data, which you should never throw out, but using that to then derive that predictability, those enhancements, and all those beautiful use cases that we're all talking about with AI.
Okay, so given how valuable that historical data is, should hotels be, even if they don't have an AI tool being implemented at that point, should they be looking at storing all of their historical data at this present moment in a data lake so that when they do invest in AI technologies, it can piggyback off that data they already have to generate forecasts and stuff like that?
100% yes, but make sure you budget. That's the main thing. Data lakes and warehouses can get quite expensive if you're not, with scale, but just make sure you budget first.
All right, so I'm going to touch on AI workflows. It's a term that we hear quite a bit. But before we go any further on it, can you explain what it actually means in practical terms for a hotel?
Okay, so I guess a simple definition of an AI workflow is a system of processes that result in a business outcome using artificial intelligence tools to stitch them together.
Okay.
Yeah, I will just add to that by just simply saying that workflow is more of a repeatable task where AI removes manual steps. If that makes sense. And it is not just a single tool that we're talking about. We're talking about, hey, if it's like kind of like a SOP in a way, right? It's your standard operating procedure, right? Is really now turned into a visual workflow that interprets how we're going to configure, right? This step or this function of the AI tool.
Yeah.
Based on what you've seen, you both, where would the biggest opportunity be to take a repetitive task, to take works off of people's plate?
Right. So, I just wanted to add to pick out a word that Carlos said, which is very important. Visual. And that's the whole thing with these AI workflows is a lot of times we already have some AI workflows that we're already using in various ways. Technically, the autocorrect for text on your phone is a type of AI workflow. Just we don't see it. It's an invisible chain of reasoning that we just have on our phones. So when we're developing these business processes, these AI workflows that are in essence taking an SOP and then diagnosing how to derive benefits using artificial tools, we need to have a visualization of that to see what's going to be connected into what. And then from there, we have a better idea of the governance on that. So, and we know what the amount of credits each thing is going to be using, where things get stuck, where there's what's called 429 errors, which is something you can look up, which is a key term in doing backup workflows for your AI. So I know that doesn't answer your immediate question, Christus, but it's a very important point that Carlos said about the visualization, just to get everyone on the same page about how things are being stitched together in various ways to generate those business outcomes, whether it's back office or guest facing.
What are some of the areas you've seen hotels actually use AI in the Caribbean?
I see it a lot on the communications platforms. A lot of them are using WhatsApp with some sort of like third-party omni-channel platform to communicate with the guests, but also communicate internally with their teams. I'm seeing a lot of that today, where they're building a lot of canned responses to when, for repetitive questions like what time is your pool open? What time does it close? What time does your snorkeling trip is on Tuesdays, etc. And a lot of these actually scrape out of your website. And if you keep your website actually up to date, a lot of those answers will come right from your website.
Yeah, 100% agree with Carlos. And again, that goes back to the whole idea of trust. So how are you going to win trust for people that are looking at you and comparing your owned channels versus the OTAs? And how you win over that trust is exactly what Carlos said is, okay, let's give very fast responses that are accurate, are in our tone of voice, and then are potentially offering value-added upsells to their experience. And, we look at the guest communication. So you have to look at this and really, you can visualize it, as Carlos said, for what does it look like for email versus text/WhatsApp versus the chatbot on your website versus voice AI versus how you're responding to RFPs that are coming in for groups, weddings, corporate retreats, etc. So you can look across all these different channels and all different segments and divide up how you're applying, and then also the if-then statements. So if a guest asks about this, where are we sending them? So a lot of times these tools, they may not be directly connected into the CRS, the Central Reservation System, or any form of ARI, availability rates and inventory, just yet, because those are complicated interfaces in real time. But you could easily do something where, okay, if a guest asks something along these lines, send them a link out to over here, and then maybe they'll purchase a spa experience, or they'll upgrade from European plan to all inclusive. Just little things like that we can visualize and really help to generate incremental value.
A lot of the hotels in the Caribbean, we have a lot of small boutique independent hotels. Some of them might have a small IT team. Some of them might not necessarily have a dedicated IT team. How are these teams being supported when it comes to implementing AI safely?
Okay, so I am sorry, Christus, I'm a huge fan of the small boutique ones as well. But I also love secrets. I mean, look, when I came down and visited you in November and toured the property, the Secret St. Lucia is a masterpiece in every single way. And I know that, from a data and IT side, it's probably beautiful behind the scenes through the support that Hyatt's offering. But I do have a special place in my heart for those unique properties that are small boutique. The owner is going from table to table at dinner and greeting guests, and you see the same faces over and over again with staff and friendliness. So where this is all going with artificial intelligence is that phrase, better, faster, cheaper. So now there are a lot of new tools, either tech vendors that are coming in with these new tools that are offering what legacy systems are pretending to offer, but for a fraction of the price. So that is happening. And specifically what's happening there is a lot of the newer platforms are built on a newer coding language and architecture. Therefore, they're able to implement features much faster. And they're not dealing with what's called legacy code, where you add one new feature and now you got to debug for a month 20 different sub-segmented microservices, as they say, because those are disconnected behind the scenes. So I see the world favoring in a lot of ways the boutique independence insofar as realizing a lot of the dreams of AI on a good budget and very nimble systems that are easy to use, that have these built-in visualization features. I want to color that as well by saying that when you look at guests, there are guests that are now looking specifically. They say, "Oh, I want a small boutique independent place in the Caribbean. What can you recommend?" They're asking those questions of search engines, of AI, but there are also guests who say, "Well, I want a big resort like the Secret St. Lucia. That's fun. I can meet a lot of people. It has multiple pools, lots of different restaurants, and I can stay there for a week at a time and have a complete end-to-end experience on site. I never have to leave the resort, and everything is beautiful. Those are potentially the same guests, but oftentimes they're two different guests over time that are looking for different experiences. So how do you find those guests? What channels are they looking on? And then for the big hotels, how are you using your loyalty system to really drive return guest rate and return visits, and understanding why they're coming to you, the quote unquote stay occasions. And then from there, the boutique people, they can move more nimbly because they don't have a system like a Hyatt that has to think across multiple different POSs, multiple different PMSs, and everything when they develop a charter of what systems they're going to move to.
All right, we have a question in the chat. It says, where do you see AI delivering the most value in areas such as finance and hospitality today? And how can we go about evaluating its impact?
So I don't want to speak too much because I know Carlos can comment on finance, but finance can be broken down in terms of operations that lead to the financial gain. So if we break down every line of the P&L and we look for ways to optimize that, then we can really push ahead with various financial goals. There's elements of finance that are a little bit beyond scope here, like looking at refinancing on merging different layers of debt or different tranches of debt around one particular bank or debt origination, and how that can potentially be a net gain over time. And artificial intelligence could run for you a very simple cash flow model to show how that might work based on different forms of repayment. An interest only for the next 48 months, and then it moves towards paying down the principal, and what it could look like with lump sum payments in terms of your overall debt service coverage. So really moving down to that bottom tranche of that profit and loss statement before you to free cash flow. So there's different ways that you can look at finance. I always start, though, by simple rule. Number one, fill the hotel. Number two, fill the hotel at the best rate. Number three, fill the hotel at the best rate with the most net revenues. Number four, fill the hotel at the best rate with the most net revenues and the most ancillary spend. And then from there, you can optimize further and further and further. But it starts at the top and it flows through. But yes, of course, for the strict finance side, like the debt service and those other elements around capital planning, there are plenty of tools you can use, and you can anonymize your data in ways to secure your enterprise. And there are various business intelligence tools that are coming and incorporating those factors in to make it secure, while also using AI to do different analyses and to stress test different scenarios around those bottom line measurements.
Yeah. Just another quick example I can give for finance. One of the most stressful times for any financial team in hospitality is month-end. You see it in the demeanor, you see it in the workload. AI can significantly reduce the time it takes to reconcile accounts. The only caveat is you need to ensure that you're using an enterprise-grade AI tool, because you don't have to be putting your company's financial data in a free AI model, because that data can be used for training. And if a hacker is good enough, it's still an LLM, it's a large language model, it's still susceptible to all of the attacks and vulnerabilities that LLMs are exposed to. So if they know the right prompts, they can fool an LLM into divulging your company information if the tool you're using is not enterprise grade. We have another question. Is there a real risk of guest data being used to train AI models? And how much of a concern is that for hotels right now? That's a very good question.
That's an incredible question. Just to your last point, Chris, I guess what you're going towards was AI's role in automating reporting, financial reporting, whether it's a night audit or something more intense. And that's something that can be engineered as a workflow loop to generate, what could take somebody a day to prepare for a month-end report or year-end report into something that's actionable within minutes. And then the layer on top of that would be to dashboard all that. So it's in real time, which is a little bit harder to do. But to the current question of whether, I guess, guest data is going to be used to train the, I guess, frontier models or the LLMs. And realistically, it does come back to what you said, Christus, about enterprise level, where, without having a visualization tool, I can use my hands. But in essence, whenever you're on any free model for whichever LLM, whatever you input into that is now being shared publicly to improve that model. And therefore, it is accessible, as Christus said, through various forms of prompt injection and prompt engineering. So when you go to an enterprise level model, and you have to evaluate different ones on this, but an enterprise level model will essentially allow you to have owned ontology. That's the word that's being tossed around now, ontology, which is to say that the frontier models, the LLMs, are being used and called, but the data is not moving two ways. So the data is staying within your own ecosystem. As an example to help visualize this is, imagine you're in ChatGPT and you upload an Excel file. If you are on a public model, a free plan or pro plan, then that anything in that Excel plus the prompt you give it is now public knowledge. But now if you're on an enterprise level model, that flat file, that Excel, is not going to be shared publicly. It's going to stay within your own ecosystem and only going to be used to improve your individual chats or work streams and projects, not going recursively back into improving the public model. So yeah, very important question. And that does come back to what Carlos said. I think Carlos dropped off, maybe had an internet failure or something like that. But the whole idea of what you're architecting and starting with the end goal in mind, and part of that as well is the data security, the compliance, and the governance to all this. Yeah.
If we still have time, I just want to ask you, just to touch back on the intelligence layer. If a hotel already has several systems in place, how can you add an intelligence layer on top of them without having to rip everything off or reinvent your tech stack and start again from scratch?
Okay, so it's in the word layer. This word layer is being overused, but in essence, what it entails is that you aren't trying to initially replace everything. That will come, but you want to have a separate system that can merge in various tasks, processes, and data that you own, that is separate from your current vendors, so that way you can do more complicated analysis. And that's really what it comes down to. Is up until now, we've been talking about legacy systems, silos of records, and interfaces, and cleaning the data, merging the data. All that stuff is incredibly hard to do when you're dealing with different systems that are used, that are built on different code and different structures, and then you're trying to get them to talk to one another. And it's incredibly hard to do because you have to get vendors that have high costs already for the software engineers and developers they're paying to now prioritize the specific connection that you need to bring one thing into another. What an intelligence layer is basically saying is, we're going to treat this as a totally separate entity. We're going to bring stuff in, and then we're going to do our own analysis based on what we have and what's unique to our organization. So therefore, the intelligence layer is also a form of intellectual property. It's your IP. And then from there, it's simply a matter of your process to bring that data in, the governance around that, and then the questions you want to ask of that data. And that's really why I see this as so liberating, because some of the analyses that we're able to do by bringing in different forms of data from external systems as well as our own systems, and then really ask these more complicated questions to then either test existing assumptions or existing processes, or figure out new potential avenues to increase value.
So for our audience listening, that know they need to do something, but they're not exactly sure where to start, what's the best way to start a conversation with GAIN? With
GAIN, I mean, I work 7 days a week, and it shows. So the best way is to, you can reach out on LinkedIn or email me. We raised that whole idea of an evaluation earlier because you can reach out to me. It's easy to get a hold of me, and I try to reply very quickly. But the whole idea of an evaluation is figuring out where to start with AI, and realistically, it's that momentum effect. So it's not about the speed; it's about the velocity. It's about the acceleration. So what are those first initial moves that are going to generate either quick time savings, so rapid time to value, or potentially help with other financial / business goals? I raised the whole idea of direct channel shift and channel optimization, because that's a big area where I see potential gain to then free up more potential budget for the deeper conversations, such as what Carlos mentioned around connecting a POS to an inventory system and procurement, which could potentially mean changing out hardware and installing new hardware at your restaurants. So it allows for these deeper conversations when you have a little bit more wiggle room on the bottom line and the top line. So an evaluation really helps to show you the quick fixes that you can do and the quick upgrades you can enact over a 2-month period. And these are tasks that maybe it's 1 hour per task or 2 hours per task, nothing where it's, you need to ignore your email and stop attending meetings for a week in order to get done, which, let's be honest, is never going to happen, because you have to attend meetings there. And then there's the tyranny of the urgent. There's always going to be something that comes up that is something you have to deal with right away. So what are the things you can deal with immediately and in between other tasks to then realize immediate time to value?
Yeah. Thank you so much, Adam, for your time and your expertise. Please thank Carlos for us. It seems that he got disconnected at some point. So
yeah.
We really appreciate both of you being on for the webinar.
Yeah, happy to help. And, again, just as a closing thought is the future favors hoteliers. And what I mean by that specifically is for the longest time, we felt shackled in a lot of ways to what our tech systems could do for us, and sort of say, well, it does this and that's it. But the whole idea of an intelligence layer is basically saying, well, we now have various tools to free up time and to ask really great questions of who our guests are, how they book, what they book while on site, who our teams are, how they work, how can we speed things up. And the future is going to result in better resort experiences, better Caribbean experiences, more unique experiences across the board, and experiences that are differentiated on a personal level.